The title of tonight's shir is Pounding Gaza into a Parking Lot, Halakhically Acceptable or Not. Now, the reason why I chose this topic or the title is because so many of our brethren say exactly that on Facebook. Let's just turn Gaza into one big parking lot. Let's just flatten it. It's enough already. We've had enough of this this craziness that's going on, the 700 rockets that were being shot from Gaza into Israel, 4 Rahman 4 casualties and many other injured. And that part is not a funny part, but what is interesting to contemplate is, as much as we are seething, so many of us are seething with anger when things like this occur, we have to really stop ourselves for a moment and ask, okay, what lamaisa is the halacha as far as taking meting out collective punishment against an entire population of people, men, women, and children? And that's really the question. I don't know whether we're going to be able to answer the question fully tonight, but we're going to be able to see the tamtzit of an essay by Rav Shaul Yisraeli, which was written in 1982. After the Lebanon War, where the Israeli army went into Beirut and basically flattened certain areas of Beirut and reduced it to rubble. I mean, you should remember that Beirut has always been, not always, but in recent history has been subject to a tremendous amount of warfare and casualties, and the IDF has contributed to that. And so the question was brought to the leading rabbis of Eretz Yisrael at that time, Rav Goren, Rav Yisraeli, Rav Uziel, and they asked them the question, what halachically, at least the ones who were driven by halacha, what halachically is our right, what kind of restraint should we not be exercising in going into Beirut? I just have a brief biography of Shaul Yisraeli. He's born in Russia in 1909. He studied Torah in hiding until he finally escaped and came to Eretz Yisrael in 1934. Studied in Yeshivat Merkaz Harav and was later chosen as the presiding Rav of the Kfar HaRo'eh settlement. He became the Av Beis Din and a member of the Council of the Chief Rabbinate of Israel. He was then appointed the Rosh Hashiva of Merkaz Harav, and alongside Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook and Rav Avram Shapira Zatzal, and he authored many works, some of which were published after his passing in 1995. But this is from Tchumen Volume 4, so it's while he's still alive. And we're going to go through some of his makoros, some of his sources. Part of this essay is a response to Rav Goren, that they differ in their opinion as to how to interpret a machlokes between the Ramban and the Rambam on a specific halacha of when going to war against an enemy, do you have to allow the enemy a place to flee before attacking the city? Okay, now you may be familiar with this. You're supposed to only besiege it from 3 sides, allow one side for the enemy to escape. What we want to do is we want to discuss this halacha tonight. Let's take a look at the machlokas between the Rambam and the Ramban, and let's build on that and get into some tachlistika things that we can perhaps extrapolate from. The Ramban in his Hasagot, the Ramban wrote a perush on the Rambam's Sefer HaMitzvos, on his Book of Commandments. What was the Ramban's function? Any place where he felt, the Rambam enumerates 613 mitzvahs, but the Ramban says that there were a few mitzvahs that the Rambam left out, and he should have included certain mitzvahs as part of the Taryag mitzvot, and he neglected to. The 5th one that the Ramban enumerates is as follows. Mitzvah chamishit shenitztavinu keshenatzur al ir. The 5th mitzvah that the Rambam left out is the following mitzvah: that when we besiege a city, when the Jewish army besieges a city, lahaniach echat min haruchot beli matzor, she'im yirtzu livroach yeh lahem derech lanus misham. He says there's a halacha, and it's one of the Taryag mitzvos, that when we besiege a city, that we have to leave open one of the sides of the city without soldiers, giving the enemy an opportunity to flee before we take possession of that city.
Does this include the Shiva Samim also, or that's a separate?
You're going to see. You're going to see. He says, Ki bazeh nilmod lihitnaheg b'chemla, afilu im oivenu be'it hamilchama. So listen to the Ramban's reasoning. Before we get to the source of this halacha, what is the reason for this mitzvah? So the Ramban posits that the reason for the mitzvah is because of the idea of tohar neshek. You know, we as Jews have to exercise compassion. We have to exercise rachmanus. And therefore, and that's true even with our enemies, even at a time of war. And therefore, we have to allow our enemy to escape if they so desire to escape. Uvo od tikun. And there's another benefit. Sheniftach lahem petach sheyivrechu v'lo yitchazku likrateinu. There's an additional benefit, which is a tactical benefit when waging war, is that when you open up a way for the enemy to escape, they will not redouble their efforts to ferociously attack us back. When a trapped animal knows that it has nowhere to run, it sometimes behaves more ferociously than it normally would. And the same thing is true in human behavior. When an enemy knows that it is surrounded by all sides, sometimes they will gain from a wellspring of strength that it didn't realize that it had the enemy, and will strike back and inflict additional casualties on our army. And this, therefore, is a tactical mitzvah, which is basically to protect the Jewish army, leave open a place for the enemy to escape so that they won't act ferociously. Shene'amar vayitzbeu al Midyan kasher tziva Hashem et Moshe. So, and where do we get this halacha from, that you have to leave one side open? Because it says vayitzbeu al Midyan, that they assembled as an army against Midyan, as God had commanded Moshe. V'darshu b'sifri hikifuha mishalosh ruchoteha. That the Sifri says that the word vayitzbeu, and I'm not really sure what the limud is, but it implies that they surrounded it only on three sides. And Rabbi Natan Omer, tein lahem ruach revi'is sheyivrechu. You're going to see a discrepancy in the girsa, but the Ramban's girsa of this Sifri is that Rabbi Nassan is just explaining the first opinion, and he's basically saying that you must leave a fourth side open. Ve'ein zeh mitzvahs sha'ah b'midyan, aval hi mitzvah l'doros b'chol milchemes harishus. You notice I underlined those three words. This is not just regarding the war against Midyan, but it is a halacha that applies anytime you're waging what's called a milchemes rishus, a war that is not mandated as a mitzvah. Now this is problematic prima facie, because God had told Moshe to wage war against Midyan. So how can you call this a milchemes rishus? So we have to better carefully define what a milchemes rishus versus a milchemes mitzvah is, in order to understand how the Ramban could tell us that it's a milchemes rishus. V'chein kasav harav b'chiburo hagadol b'hilchot melachim u'milchamotehem. And the Rambam writes the same thing. The Rambam himself writes this, that it's an obligation that when going out to war you have to leave one side open, which only intensifies the implicit kasha on the Rambam. The Rambam who wrote Hilchot Melachim in Mishnah Torah is the same Rambam who wrote the Sefer HaMitzvos. So if he holds that this is a necessary halacha in warfare, why does he omit it in his Sefer HaMitzvos? That's the implicit question. If you want to see the source in the Rambam, it's source number 2. Kishetzarin al ir letofsa, ein makifen osa me'arba ruchoseha ela mishalosh ruchoseha, umenichin makom levoreach ulechol mi sheyirtza lihimalet al nafsho. So you're not allowed to surround the besieged city on all four sides. You have to allow people to escape. Anyone who wishes to not fight and to escape has to be allowed to escape. Shenemar vayitzbeu al Midyan. And by the way, it could be from the letter Beis and Aleph that it means three. That's the Gemach. I don't know. I'm not sure how the word Vayitzbu. I'm sure the Meforshim explain it, but I just didn't look it up. Kasher tziva Hashem es Moshe mipi hashmuel lamdu shebekach tzivahu. And our Mesorah is that the word Vayitzbu al Midyan, as God had commanded Moshe, refers to only besieging it on three sides, not on four sides. The Megillas Esther, yes?
How would that be any different than an Ir B'dachas? It would have been...
An Ir Hanidachas is not an act of war. It's an act of wiping out an entire city, and you don't allow people to escape.
Men, women, and children.
Men, women, and children, it's an idolatrous city. Flagrantly idolatrous in the center of Eretz Yisrael. Totally separate, totally different halacha. Like also Amalek is a totally separate, exceptional halacha, where there is no opportunity for people to flee.
But you just go straight, it's not an issue of compassion.
No, it is an issue of
It's not an
compassion.
issue of compassion.
The Ramban just told us it's an issue of compassion.
I was thinking, that's what I'm saying. How does he rationalize that with Ir B'dachas, where there's no compassion?
The question you're asking is, he's saying that this mitzvah is one of compassion. What about the other times when God says show no compassion? So does that not prove that the Torah does not require us to have compassion? Not at all. There are times when the Torah compels us to have compassion in regular engagement in warfare. There are exceptional situations where the Torah says don't have compassion. Ir Hanidachas, Amalek, those are the exceptions. Okay? Anyway, the Megillas Esther says that he defends the Rambam. Why didn't the Rambam include this as one of the 613 commandments? He says, V'nira li, ki masha harav lo mina'ah, ulefi shezehu chelek mimitzvas milchemes harishus, shekvar mana b'mitzvas asei kuftzadi, uchvar nispara b'shorish yud aleph she'en lamanot chachalakim. Basically, this has to do with the rules of how the Rambam itemizes the 613 commandments. We already have a mitzvah of milchemes rishus, of going out to war against our enemies that is not commanded by God, but is optional, that we can do at our discretion. And that's a general category. And subsumed under that general category is that when you do besiege a city, in that situation, you have to leave one side open. So it makes sense that the Rambam would not itemize this as a separate mitzvah because it's subsumed under the general category mitzvah of going out to war in a milchemes rishus. Okay, that's the Megillas Esther's explanation. Okay, the Sefer HaChinuch says the same thing, and also says that it only applies to a milchemes rishus. But, says the Sefer HaChinuch, when it comes to a milchemes mitzvah, when God mandates that we have an obligation to conquer the Shivas Amamin, the 7 nations, then we don't leave one side open. And like he says in the 3rd paragraph, I'll just jump to that because of time constraints. He says the law of trying to make peace first before going out to war applies to any military engagement, whether it's milchemes rishus or a milchemes mitzvah. He says, bein milchemes mitzvah, bein milchemes rishus. Milchemes mitzvah, what is the definition of a milchemes mitzvah, says the Sefer HaChinuch? Kegon shiva amamin va'amalek. When you go out to fight against the 7 indigenous nations of Canaan, or you go to fight Amalek, you have to offer them the opportunity to surrender and to become the vassals of the state, okay? And therefore, that they would go through a process of becoming gerim toshavim, of becoming righteous Gentiles who abide by the laws of the land, shiva mitzvahs b'nei Noach, and then you don't have to kill them. But if they refuse, if they don't want to buy into the Jewish government, so then there's a distinction to be made between milchemes mitzvah and milchemes rishus. When it's a milchemes mitzvah, says the Sefer HaChinuch, milchemes mitzvah ein mechayin mehen kol neshama, you wipe out the entire population, and with a milchemes rishus, right? So then you have to leave open one side and allow those who wish to escape to escape. Okay.
So is the Chinuch saying that Amalek also, if they agree to become subservient, that
Correct. That's true with Amalek.
it's a
Yeah,
good Kiddush, no?
could be. Could be. The Rambam also was a whole shir on Amalek that we're not going to go into tonight as far as whether we accept Gerim from Amalek, and the answer is we do. Even not only Gerei Toshav, but even Gerei Tzedek we accept from Amalek. Okay.
The level of the Sifri in the halachic,
It's a good question. I think every Rishon has a different way of categorizing its priority. Okay? The Minchas Chinuch, in his commentary to this Sefer HaChinuch, writes that V'harambam eino mechalek bein milchemes mitzvah l'rishus, kevin deyalfinan mimidyan. Now, the Minchas Chinuch disagrees with both the Ramban and the Megillas Esther, who both take it as a given that the Rambam is only referring to a milchemes rishus. But if you look carefully at the words of the Rambam, there's no basis for making that distinction, because he just says generically when you go out to war, and he doesn't make a differentiation between milchemes mitzvah and milchemes rishus. He says you must always leave one of the four sides open. And not only that, but the Minchas Chinuch says that think about what the source text of this halacha is. It's the war with Midyan. Was not the war with Midyan a milchemes mitzvah commanded by God? So therefore, the Rambam makes sense, and he leaves off with it, Tzarechiyun. I don't understand where the Sefer HaChinuch, where the Ramban get this idea that this halacha of leaving open one side only applies to a milchemes rishus and not to a milchemes mitzvah. And by the way, all we've seen so far is that the definition of a milchemes mitzvah versus a milchemes rishus is a milchemes mitzvah is that which is commanded by God, as the word implies, mitzvah, and milchemes rishus is that which the Jewish people or the Jewish king can engage at his discretion. That's all we know. But we have to really define it more carefully in order to get clarity on this matter, because otherwise it's very unclear why is milchemes midyan considered to be not a milchemes mitzvah by the Ramban and by the Sefer HaChinuch. Okay, but before we do that, let's take a look at an interesting commentary from the Meshech Chachma of the 19th century, and let's see what he says. HaRamban, the Sefer HaMitzvos, Mana mitzvah saseh hach de dorish b'sifri kasher tziva Hashem es Moshe shelo ikifu osa midalad ruchoseha. The Ramban says that one of the 613 mitzvahs needs to be something that the Rambam omitted, which is that you have to leave one of the four sides open. The Tam Pluk Sasam. Let me offer what I consider to be the explanation of their machlokas. The Haramban Sover, the Chemo dehaya mitzvah levakesh l'shalom, Kain hi mitzvah lachus al nafsham ulahaniach lehem ezet tzad lahatzil nafsham ulahaniach tzad echad panui lihiyos lahem makom livrach. In the opinion of Reb Meir Simcha, this is what the machlokus is based on between the Rambam and the Ramban as to whether this is its own mitzvah of the Taryag mitzvahs. The Ramban believes that this is part of the obligation of Tohar HaNeshek, that you have to be ethical and compassionate when you're going out to war against your enemy. That's what the Ramban maintains. That you have to be a Rachaman. And just like you have to offer the opportunity for the enemy to surrender before attacking, you also, even when they refuse to make peace, you have to leave them an opportunity to flee and not get massacred by the Israeli army. Okay? That's the Ramban Shita. It's all part of the obligation for an Israeli army to be compassionate and to be ethical. However, the Rambam views it differently. Aval harambam sover dehu ofan me ofanei hamilchama. Hainu limud b'chukot hamilchama, she'im yakifu otam mikol tzad, u mehit ya'asham b'chayehem ki yiplu biyad tsar, ya'amdu al nafsham b'chol she'erit kocham v'yuchlu la'asot chayil, ka'asher yadua b'korot ha'itim, shekama pe'amim ba migodel hayeush hanitzuach hagadol. Beautiful. What does Reb Meir Simcha say? That which the Ramban had said afterwards. He says the Rambam Shita is that this is not a requirement for compassion. It's a tactic in war. That the Torah is advocating that when you go out to war, you want to make sure you're going to win the battle against the enemy, leave one of the four sides open, because if you besiege them from all sides, you're going to be dealing with an enemy that views itself as a trapped, caged animal. And sometimes, when there is the dimmest hope, that's when the enemy redoubles its efforts, behaves ferociously, and is able to gain its strength to strike back. And you don't want to have to deal with that. And that's why the Rambam doesn't view it as a mitzvah, because it's a strategic issue. It's an issue of strategy. It's not an inyan of conditioning the Jewish people to be compassionate and so forth. So that's the whole basis as to what Reb Meir Simcha says is the reason why the Ramban lists it as one of the Taryag mitzvahs, because it's a mitzvah of compassion, and why the Rambam says it's not at all related to compassion whatsoever. It's got to do with what strategically makes the most sense when you're waging war. And therefore, there's no reason to itemize it as a separate mitzvah. So the problem that Rav Goren raises, which we're not going to see inside, and Rav Yisraeli ultimately acknowledges this in his essay, is that the language of the Rambam does not imply that it's a strategic matter, but rather it's a tzivoy from the Ribono Shel Olam. And if you look back again in Hilchos Melachim, it really does seem that Kasher Tziva Hashem es Moshe means that God commanded Moshe to do this, not that this was a recommendation that we have in order to be able to win the war. So it seems to be that the language is somewhat problematic. But what is interesting is that the Malbim points out that there was a Jewish leader called Menachem in Sefer Melachim Beis, and when he went out to war, the Torah says, or the Tanakh says, Az yakem Menachem es tifsach ve'es kol asher ba, ki lo pasach vayach. He says that Menachem went to war against Tifsach and all of its inhabitants because he did not open up and he struck it. And the Malbim says that this is a criticism against this Menachem for not opening it up on four sides. Now, let's take a look and try to get a little bit more clarity on the Rambam's definition of the difference between a Milchemes Mitzvah and a Milchemes Rishus. And we'll find this going back to Hilchos Melachim, Perek Hey. The Rambam writes, Ein hamelech nilcham techila ela milchemet mitzvah. That the initial wars that a king engages in are milchemes mitzvah. He's not allowed to, at his own discretion, engage in battle. He must first engage in the battles that he is mandated to engage in by God. What is the definition? Ve'ezo hi milchemes mitzvah. Zu milchemes shiva amamim. U milchemes amalek. Ve'ezras Yisrael miyatzar sheba aleihim. The Rambam says that there are three types of milchemes mitzvah. We have to be very careful because up until now we've only seen the first two. Number one, says the Rambam, is milchemes shiva amamim, waging battle against the 7 indigenous Canaanite tribes. Definition number 2 of milchemes mitzvah, waging war with Amalek. Definition number 3, and this is the Lamaisa crucial issue, Ezrat Yisrael miyad tsar sheba alehem, helping the Jewish people when they are being attacked. Defensive battle, defensive operation, exactly. Now, this is a big issue. This is a big issue because this is what the poskim today rely on. What do you need in order to determine whether you have, now, hold that thought, just one second. V'achar kach nilcham b'milchemet harishut, v'hi ha'milchama shenilcham im sha'ar ha'amim kedei laharchiv gevul Yisrael u'laharbot b'gdulato v'shamo. Only once he's taken care of all of the milchemes mitzvah that he is obligated to engage in, is he then permitted to engage in milchemes rishus, which is done for one of two reasons. Either to expand the borders of Eretz Yisrael, or to expand the fame of the Jewish kingdom, or of himself the king, if he feels that that would be beneficial. Now, Halacha Beis, take a quick look. The Rambam writes, Milchemes mitzvah enot tzarech litol barishus beistin elayotze me'atzma b'chol eis v'kofe ha'am latzeit. Aval milchemet harishut eno motzi ha'am ba ela al pi beistin shal shivim va'echad. Here's another difference between a milchemes mitzvah and a milchemes rishus, operationally, functionally. When a king has control over the government and over the militia, he does not need to seek anyone else's permission in order to go out to war, because he's already been mandated by God to engage in milchemes mitzvah. So he doesn't need anyone's permission. But when he wants to do a milchemes rishus, what's the halacha? He has to first get the sanction of the Sanhedrin before he's allowed to go out to milchemes rishus. So Rabbi Sai, let me ask you a very simple question. Today, is it possible to engage in milchemes rishus? Is the Israeli government today halachically permitted to engage in milchemes rishus? Why not, Laser? There's no Sanhedrin. So because there's no Sanhedrin, at least not that that is universally acknowledged or recognized, any kind of milchama that the Israeli government today engages in is got to be one of two things. Either it's anti-halachic, which maybe Naturi Karta holds by, right? Or it's a milchemes mitzvah.
That is milchemes.
But that's by definition a milchemes mitzvah, right? Right. So,
except does the leadership or the government of Eretz Yisrael have the same mandate?
have the same status of a melech? Good question. We would have to submit that in order for it to be halachically within the parameters, melech is lav davka. Whatever the memshala is at the time has the din of a melech. Lichaora. Okay? That's in Hilchos Malachim. We'd have to analyze that further. But we're going to make that assumption, David. Okay? Now, the Shiorei Karban, which is a commentary on the Yerushalmi, drills down a little bit further. And in his commentary, he notes that there's a machlokes between the Chachamim and Rebbe Yehuda as to what the difference between a milchemes mitzvah and a milchemes rishus is. And there's also another term that's used in the Yerushalmi and the Bavli called milchemet chova. And the Rambam seems to ignore the terminology of milchemet chova and only uses the terms milchemes mitzvah versus milchemes rishus. And the Baal Knesses Hagdola in Shulchan Aruch writes that in his opinion, the Rambam is choosing one opinion over the other in the Yerushalmi, choosing the sheet of Rebbe Yehuda over the sheet of the Chachamim. And that's where we come in to understand his commentary. And he writes, he says, Kosav Arav Baal Knesses Hagdola b'chelak Orachayim b'chidushav al harambam Perakei mihilchos Melacham Midakosav harambam ve'ezu mechelmes mitzvah melchemes zayin amim in ve'ezus Yisrael miyad sar sheba aleim shmami no desover kareb Yehuda umipnei kach dochak harbe beferish hashas bevavli ayin sham. And therefore he launches into a whole way of trying to explain the Bavli and reconciling it with the Yerushalmi and the Rambam. Udevarav temuhim. But I can't really understand the Knesses Hagdola's pshat. Mi'ika laman da'amar de'ezus Yisrael miyad sar sheba aleihem lav mitzvah. How can anyone possibly suggest that there's another opinion that the Rambam is not subscribing to? Is it possible that anyone would suggest that that a defensive war to defend the Jewish people from an attacker is not a milchemes mitzvah, that it's only something that has to be mandated by the Sanhedrin, and we have to think about it before we go out to wage battle? Does that make any sense? Dahafilu biyachid hanirdaf ika ase v'lo sase lahatzilo kidikasav lo samar al dam reyecha uchsiv hashivosolo zu abedas nefesh v'chein mavur b'sugyan. He says even when it comes to one individual, there's both a positive and negative commandment to save that person's life if he's in danger or under attack. So, al achas kama v'kama, is it a mitzvah to save someone when an entire population is under attack? How could anyone think that that's not a milchemes mitzvah? V'ha da'omer bevavli le'me'ute akum de lo leisi olayhu Eina perish kamo shehaven harav b'knesses hagdola dahainu lahatzila miyad tsar shebo aleim, ela perish she'osa milchama im shcheinav sheyishlachu sheberov hayamim ya'asu imo milchama lekach osa milchama achshav imohem lema'atam shlo yeh bam koach lavo al Yisrael. V'zeh muvur ma'od b'loshen hashas bavli v'advarim berurim be'ein gimgum. And therefore he says the only area of differentiation, when the Yerushalmi quotes Reb Yehuda as saying that only according to Reb Yehuda is a milchemes mitzvah, a protection that the other nations should not attack us, is a preemptive war. A preemptive war means that I've argued that the Six-Day War was a preemptive war, right? Is where we go out to war before being attacked, because we feel that we are under threat of imminently being attacked sometime in the future. There's potentially a machlokes as to whether that's called a milchemes mitzvah or a milchemes rishus. But everyone agrees, and Rav Shol Yisraeli really subscribes to this perush, that if we are fighting a defensive battle because we're under attack, everyone in the Bavli and the Yerushalmi would agree that that's called a milchemes mitzvah. Less man de polik. No one would disagree to that issue. Okay, now that we have all of the background information, let's go. This is a much larger essay of Rav Yisraeli, but let's go to pull out some of the snippets that he has to say. And the end of the tshuvas, which is really primarily what we're going to be seeing, is really the parts that are the interesting parts that are nogei l'ma'aseh. So as I mentioned to you before, Rav Gorin took issue with the way Rav Yisraeli was interpreting the machlokes between the Rambam and the Ramban, and in the course of doing that, he also was cholek with the Meshech Chachma. Meshech Chachma had said that the difference between the Rambam and the Ramban is the Ramban views it as an act of compassion to leave open one side, and the Rambam views it as a strategy of war, and that's why he doesn't count it as a mitzvah. He says, "Ulefi ma sheratza harav Shlomo Goren lahachnis b'das hachinuch ba'haramban." Also, what's problematic is that the Rambam doesn't seem to differentiate between a milchemes mitzvah and a milchemes rishus. But the Sefer Hachinuch and the Ramban do, and the question is, where do they get that from? He says, you can't tell me that, and what Goren was essentially suggesting is that even fighting a defensive war could be called a milchemes rishus. And this is really what Rav Yisraeli was trying to show as a highlight of the main machlokas between himself and Rav Goren, is that according to you, Rav Goren, the Ramban and the Sefer HaChinuch are talking about the Israeli army fighting a defensive battle against an enemy that is attacking us that may not be from the Shiva Amamin and may not be from Amalek. Because you suggested, Rav Goren, that the Ramban and the Sefer HaChinuch hold that even fighting a defensive battle could be qualified as a milchemes rishus, like we saw quoted from the Knesses Hagdola. And he says that's problematic, because according to what you're saying, how could Israel today halakhically be allowed to fight a milchemes rishus without a Sanhedrin? So that's the first paragraph of what he says. Let's go to Yud Beis. וכאן אנו באים לתמיהסו פליאסו של המנחס חינוך. איך יתקן לחלק בעניין הנחס רוח רביעס בין מלחמס מצווה לרשוס, בעוד שעיקר הלימוד הוא ממג'ן וזו מלחמס מצווה הייסה, שרי הייסה על פי ציווי מפורש מעיס השם כמבואר בכסובה. The question that the Minchas Chinuch asked on the Chinuch and on the Ramban is, how could you call the war against Midian a Milchemes Rishus if after all God commanded it? That doesn't sound like a Milchemes Rishus, that sounds like a Milchemes Mitzvah. V'nira shedivrei haRamban b'sefer haMitzvos v'chein haChinuch mevusasim al ma shekosav haRamban b'pirusho al haTorah. It seems to me that the Ramban is basing himself on his Torah commentary in Parshas Matos. V'zeh l'shono, v'shilach lahem mu'atim lahakot be'arei ha'perazi, v'chol eitz tov lahapil, v'chol mayim listom, v'chol chalaka tova lahachiv ba'avanim kiminhag hasholelim. That, according to the Ramban, what did the Midianites do against the Israelites? We know the famous thing that they did was to try to get the Jewish men to sin. But what was their tactic in battle against the Jews? They weren't out to kill them. They were out to pillage them and to try to get them to leave them alone. And what they were doing essentially is the Midianites went ahead and they said, knock down every tree, plug up every well that the Jews have dug, and everything that you can do to create mayhem against the Jews is what you should do. Throw rocks at them and so forth. V'lo tziva lahem davar rak lihit nakem ka'asher timtza yadam. V'Hashem yisbarach asher lo hamilchama nasan midyan u'malcheim ve'areim biyadam. And therefore, when God said, take vengeance upon Midian, it doesn't mean take vengeance by totally wiping them out, but it means take vengeance by paying them back with what they did to you, do back to them. So this was not an enemy, this was not a war to the death, but rather because Midian tried to demoralize you and wreak mayhem in your settlements, you have an obligation to do the same to them as an act of justice.